Hello and welcome to the 4th anniversary edition of India's World. We are gathered here today at Jawaharlal Nehru University to do a midterm review of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy. It's not a formal review, it's an informal review amongst friends. These are all experts on foreign policy. At first sight, if you look at Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy initiatives, they look awe-inspiring. The kind of energy and political capital he has invested in pursuing his foreign policy goals have been tremendous. But what we are asking today is that what have been the outcomes of his foreign policy initiatives? How has he been able to mold international opinion and international environment in India's favor? And what is the state of his neighborhood first policy? How has it fared? To answer these questions and more, I have with me a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a distinguished diplomat. He's been Foreign Secretary of India. He's also been India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France, and Russia. We have another Foreign Secretary with us, another eminent diplomat, Ambassador Lalit Mansingh. He was India's ambassador to the United States and High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. We have with us Mr. Manish Tewari. He's a former Union Minister as well as a former Lok Sabha MP. He is a distinguished lawyer and spokesperson of the Congress. But he's here especially because he's also a strategic thinker and a columnist who writes on diplomacy and thinks about these issues. We also have with us my old friend Dr. C. Rajamohan. He's one of our foremost commentators on foreign policy. He's an academic, journalist and author rolled into one. Currently, he's the director of Carnegie India, a think tank based in New Delhi. So I welcome all of you to this discussion. I also welcome all of you distinguished students and teachers of Jawaharlal Nehru University to this discussion. I hope that at the end of this discussion, we will have some time for questions, and for that reason, I would request my guests to be brief in their interventions. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. Let's look at the general picture first. What were the major foreign policy goals of the Modi government when it assumed power, and to what extent has it achieved those goals? Or is it on its way of achieving those goals halfway there, one-third of the way there?
Well, I would say that the most important goal he had, and which was surprising, was to mend his personal relationship with the United States of America and to give a very strong push to our relationship with that country. That I would single out as something which stands out in terms of his initiatives, because for the rest, whether neighborhood first or relationship with China or Japan or Russia or focus on the Indian Ocean, all these things were being done by previous governments. Because of his personality, energy and push, he imparted a dynamism to all this, especially this neighborhood first, when he invited all the SAARC leaders to come to his swearing-in ceremony. He launched ideas like the SAARC satellite and this and that, etc., etc. But the focus on the United States came from him, and there has been a vast improvement of our relations with the United States. Now, with regard to, and very briefly, what one might say is the end result of his initiatives, I would say that with the United States we are doing well. There can always be two views how close we should get to the United States, but that's a separate debate. With China, he began very well. He had experience of China. Chinese were coming to the vibrant Gujarat summit, etc., etc. But I think we've entered into a period of tensions with China. Yeah. With the neighbors, he actually did very well with regard to Nepal and Bangladesh. Nepal initially, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. With Nepal, there was a bit of a setback. Things are better.
We're going to discuss this in detail, but you think he's on his way to achieving his goals?
But one more thing which I must mention in terms of his initiatives is the diaspora. I don't think that any previous Prime Minister paid so much attention to the Indian diaspora as part of building up the image of India abroad.
Okay. Ambassador Mansingh, how many of the foreign policy gains or achievements of the Modi government are legacy gains? For example, things that were already in the pipeline, like the land boundary agreement with Bangladesh or the civil nuclear agreement with Australia and Japan. And how many of them are new and a result of fresh initiatives that he's taken?
But let's be clear, Mr. Modi has not brought in a new foreign policy. I think its foreign policy is marked by continuity. There is nothing that he has done that is so dramatically different from what his predecessors, Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Vajpayee, had done. But what he has brought into this is a certain vigor and energy into implementing their goals, and I would say a greater clarity on the objectives of Indian foreign policy. I think it's quite clear if you go back to the BJP manifesto and the way the Modi government has implemented foreign policy, 3 priority goals. One is Samriddhi, that's prosperity, economic growth. Second is Suraksha, that's security. Third is Swabhimana, status, that India must sit at the high tables of the world. And I think if you look at overall, the foreign policy has made significant gains in all these areas. About a year ago in one of your programs, I had given him in my scorecard about 6.5%. I will add one more percent, 7.5, largely because last year there were 2 huge gaps.
7.5 out of 10.
Out of 10. Last year there were 2 huge gaps on Pakistan and China. This time I think he's got a policy on Pakistan that one can live with, but on China there is a big gap.
Okay,
So-
we'll come to that
Yes.
in
So,
a detailed
yeah.
discussion. Mr. Tewari, what have been the advantages of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's highly personalized diplomacy and the vim and the vigor that he brings to diplomacy, as Ambassador Lalit Mansingh pointed out?
Well, Bharat, I'll try and be as non-partisan as possible. But as I look over the last 2 years, I think Prime Minister Modi fairly deserves a D and an E in reverse. An E for effort and a D for creating an unmitigated disaster. And the reason why I say that is because I doubt as to whether this government at all has a foreign policy in the first place. Yes, there are elements of continuity. Ambassador Lalit Mansingh was absolutely correct, which go back into time, beyond the Dr. Manmohan Singh administration, even into Mr. Vajpayee's administration, if not before that. But if you specifically look at it, in terms of the United States of America, there has not been a single big idea in the relationship after the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement. Yes, there has been a closer defense agreement, and which is predicated on the United States earning a lot of money out of India for all the stuff that we are buying from them. And then if you go country by country, you find that we are actually much worse off than we were before. And I would conclude, since you said 1.25 minutes, the most worrying aspect of this is the closeness between Russia and Pakistan. Russia has been possibly the longest standing ally which India has. And for Russia to cozy up to Pakistan and now even talk about joining the CPAC, I think is something India needs to be extremely concerned about.
Okay, but Raj, my question really to Manish was that about his personalized approach to diplomacy. Now, taking that question further, do you think that halfway through his term, we are finding that his personalized approach to diplomacy and the hype that the media builds up before every prime ministerial visit abroad, they've started fetching diminishing returns?
Look, I would say foreign policy is a personalized thing in all the major countries. So it's a long age of a separate foreign minister devising foreign policy that is long gone. The chief executive, whether it is the president or the prime minister today, in most large countries runs the foreign policy. And for in India, it's certainly not new. Mr. Nehru was his own foreign minister. Mr. Indira Gandhi had centralized everything. So was Rajiv Gandhi. So in a sense, actually, having a government with a majority and a strong leader, personalization and vigor has come naturally back to the conduct of foreign policy. Second thing, I think we got to be clear on one thing. It is not that a new guy comes into South Block or Delhi and says, look, these are my goals and I'm going to achieve them. Because there is a world outside, a world of sovereign actors, each with his own interests. So therefore, you have to negotiate a way out. It's not as if, say, I want to do things differently, things are going to happen. So I think what he has brought within the constraints of a fluid international environment, what he has done is, I would say quickly, 3 things. One, he's brought decisiveness. The previous government took the historic step of negotiating the boundary dispute with Bangladesh, but did not have the political capacity to take it through the parliament. While this government, in spite of the opposition in Assam and Bengal from his own party, He's pushed it through, he's got sorted out. I think that's a huge achievement. With the US, the nuclear deal was languishing because of the liability issue, on a range of other things. We just couldn't finish it. This man has finished it. So I think you got to give him good marks for completing, because a lot of things in the previous government was stuck because of the internal dissensions within the ruling coalition and the inability to force through decisions.
So decisiveness is one. What are the other two things?
Yeah, I'll say second is the fact that you are willing to think like a major power.
Okay.
That the previous government still, if you go back, the reluctance to be seen as a major power,
Okay.
the hesitation. The third thing is that I think there is a greater emphasis on India's cultural footprint around the world. I think that is certainly new, and I think there's a whole lot of input on strengthening India's soft power, which I think is very impressive.
So let's talk about the United States, Sibal. Manish Tewari referred to it, and he seemed to suggest that Prime Minister Modi has bought into Washington's transactional expectation from New Delhi, buying more and more expensive military hardware so that the US gets to trust India. But my question to you is, this trust deficit that existed between India and US, was it not the result of the punitive policies that US administrations themselves followed and continue to follow? For example, the United States Trade Representative is not going to become a friend of India when it comes to pharmaceutical patents, or when it comes to solar panels and how much indigenous content they should have, or if they accuse you of anti-dumping duties.
Well, you know, if you look at all the allies of the United States, they have their own grievances against the United States. Nobody is happy, but the United States is the strongest power in the world. It is very arbitrary, very often in its policies and actions and decisions. And this is probably going to become even more under Trump. So if India has not got what we thought might be the full benefit of this relationship, this doesn't surprise me, because at the end of the day, the United States will pursue its national interest. And to the extent that their national interest coincides with yours, they will open doors for you. If not, then you will always find them very difficult to deal with. You are quite right that on the economic side, and when they say the business of America is business, then on that they're going to be very hard and extract the maximum from you and use all the tools of their legislation.
What do we get in return? Their trust?
No.
Or do we get something
look,
tangible?
Everybody now agrees that the most important relationship we have with the United States is with the United States of America, for good or for bad. We have over 50 dialogues spanning all sorts of areas of our relationship. It's not only the defense. And the fact that our relationship with the United States improved had a very positive fallout on our relationship with Japan, Australia, Canada. You think Canada would have ever agreed to a nuclear deal with India or Australia had it not been for the doors opened by the United States initially, etc., etc. Then it also gives us room to maneuver vis-a-vis China, because the joint strategic vision that we have signed with the United States on Asia Pacific and the Indian Ocean, if you really scratch it, what does it mean? What are the threats to the Indian Ocean and the Asia Pacific area? These threats come from the rise of China, and it's unpredictable, and what we see is expansionist conduct. Yeah. So there is a bit of a safety wall that is being built up there. United States has a lot of influence, though declining. In the Gulf areas, our relationship with the Gulf areas is improving. So there is an equation there that we can build on. One can elaborate on this, but let us be realistic. America will never be 100% on our side. There always will be negatives in our relationship. The thing is whether the positives should be more than the negatives or the reverse. I think under Modi, the positives are more than the negatives.
Ambassador Lalit Mansingh, do you agree with him? And also, do you think that India is leaning far too much on the United States to achieve its modest goal of becoming a leading power in the world, not a superpower, but a leading power? And does that really mean that that we should become virtually a military ally of the United States and have cooperation with them? Signing the foundational agreements. We've signed 2 already. This government's the general JISMOA was signed in 2002. LEMOA, the logistic exchange and a memorandum of agreement was signed in August this year. They will allow for interoperability of equipment, etc., sharing of military and geospatial data. So do we need to get into such a close embrace with America for it to help us become a leading power?
Well, first let's be clear. Diplomacy is transactional. There is no question that countries sort of bargain with each other and try to get best advantage. There's nothing wrong in being transactional. And it's not only America being transactional, we are transactional too. Point is, does this transaction benefit you? Now, you're giving the impression that the Americans are forcing us to buy equipment from them because we want to earn their trust. That's not true.
No. We want to buy the equipment so that we gain the trust. Americans are not forcing.
No. The point is that certain kinds of equipment were not available to us because of the sanctions that the United States had against us. The sanctions have been lifted and the Americans are opening the doors to the latest technology. So, nobody is forcing us to go there. We are buying the equipment because in some areas they have the best equipment. But where we find that the Russians have better equipment, we are also buying from there. We are buying from the Israelis. The point is, today we are in the happy position of deciding that we will have the choice of technology and we can shop it from anywhere. Earlier the American doors were shut, now they are open. So, I think when you comes to the United States, first of all, it benefits us immensely in terms of our security. Don't forget that we also have the security, a kind of insurance against China in the Indo-Pacific area, which is an implied result of our closeness to Washington. We should also not forget that the Americans have shifted their stand even on Pakistan to some extent. Our anti-terrorism cooperation is going on. And unlike what most people believe that nothing is happening after the nuclear deal, there are something like 50 high-level bilateral dialogues that are being pursued, even as we speak.
Okay.
So, there's a lot going on with the United States, and I think India is the beneficiary.
Okay. So, Manish, from what you've heard, now are you willing to change what you said earlier? Your perspective was there is no foreign policy, and now you've heard that there is not only a lot of foreign policy, but a lot of good things are happening.
Well, with great respect to the collective institutional wisdom on this panel, I would like to very respectfully dissent. And the reason for that is, if you just look at the United States of America, I think the last big thing we did with them was the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement. And it's correct that the agreement languished primarily because we were not able to get the liability issue sorted out. But has this government been able to get the liability issue sorted out? And the answer is no, because by any clarification or by any notification, you cannot surmount and override the letter of the law. The liability law as it stands, in section 17 talks about the supplier's liability. Now, that's not going to go away by any notification, and any lawyer who's going to look at it and advise a supplier is going to tell you that your liability stood exactly where it was before these clarifications were issued when President Barack Obama was here. So, except for, well, signing one foundational agreement, now there can be many views about it. There is a view which says that since India and United States do see, I will not say a common adversary, but a rising power in China, and therefore there is a need to, and I would not use the word contain, but at least be cognizant of it. A certain amount of interoperability is not a bad idea. So therefore, if you are going to collaborate with the US, that's not, according to me.
I thought the two ambassadors here, the former foreign secretaries, were saying that a lot of new doors have opened for you, and you've got leverage in parts of the world where you did not have any earlier.
Well, primarily, look, in terms of dialogue, we've been talking to the United States for donkey's years. We've had a strategic dialogue with them, we've got a 2+2 dialogue with them, and we've got various other across-the-board dialogues going, including on films and soft power. But, when you really benchmark an achievement, or when you benchmark the performance of a government, you benchmark it in terms of what's the big idea, where have you got with the big idea. And the reality is that all throughout the Obama years, the 8 years of President Obama, India and the United States have not been able to come up with a new idea after the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement.
Okay, Raj, do you agree with him? I mean, you've reported from America, you lived there, you work for Carnegie. Do you buy what Manish is saying, or does your judgment lie more towards what Mr. Lalit Mansingh and Mr. Sibal said?
I think one of the great things that the Congress government did was, in this very first year, come up with a lot of new ideas. But I think it's failure, with due respect to a leading congressman here, is that it was its inability to implement those agreements on the defense agreement, on the nuclear agreement, and the regional cooperation, on a range of things. The big ideas, he's absolutely right, came in the very first year of Manmohan Singh, 2004 to 2005, not just with the US.
Yeah.
On China, the agreement to resolve the boundary, with Pakistan to engage with them, the strategic partnership agreement with Japan. But I think the problem, the rest of the 9 years, the UPA government worked with the fear of the backlash against those agreements. I think to his credit, what
See, I
Modi
didn't
has
want
done.
to, really, I mean, that view I'll accept. But this business of whether the US, improving ties with US has helped us elsewhere in the world.
No, that's fairly clear. Look, I mean, I think the US allies, Japan, Australia, and a whole lot of countries wouldn't have dealt with you the way they deal with you today. I mean, that's one part. Second, I think we also got to remember, when you asked a question, are we getting too close to the Americans? Now, there was a time when I was still in JNU, I mean, when Indira Gandhi signed the 1971 treaty with the Russians, Indo-Soviet, a treaty, a security treaty, and until all the opposition parties said this is departure from non-alignment. We were in the 77 elections. The Janata Party said, look, there are secret clauses, so we're going to dismantle this alliance. So when they came to power, they said there was no secret clause, there was no secrets in it, and that they found the agreement with Russia was good for India. Similarly here, I think most parties today agree that expanding the relationship with the US benefits us. But I think the important thing is, unlike in the 70s today, we are the third largest economy in PPP terms, 6th or 7th depending on the exchange rate. You have the third largest military in the world. You have the 5th largest military spending in the world. The problem is we still think like a third world country, while your aggregate resources and capabilities put you in a different position. So I think it is not a question of how close do you go to someone, how do you leverage each relationship to your advantage.
Okay, Mr. Sibal, so broadly speaking, the sense I get is that India's foreign policy today is marked by closer ties with the US because they're beneficial, but is it also marked by being fearful of displeasing China? And has that made India's foreign policy risk averse? And
I don't think so. In fact, I was very pleasantly surprised that when Xi Jinping came here and standing next to him in the joint press conference, because the Depsang incident had occurred, he actually pointedly referred to that and expressed virtually his displeasure and that this was happening. It takes a lot of courage, given the manner in which we have dealt with China in the past, to seek accountability publicly from Xi Jinping. And he sought it privately also, I understand. When he went to Japan, he spoke publicly about expansionism of China, and in fact said that in today's world there's no room for expansionism and one should focus on development because that's in the interest of everyone. We have dealt very well and confidently with the incidents that have taken place on the border, and even signing this joint vision agreement, one can have two views about it, on the Asia-Pacific and Indian Ocean with China in the backdrop, actually constitutes a big change in India's thinking, strategic thinking, where for the first time we have agreed that the security of the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean are linked. And this creates its own momentum and dynamism in terms of what we want them to do together in order to ensure the safety of the sea lanes of communication and build up relationships, etc., etc. So I think he's dealt confidently with China, though of course China is the second biggest power in the world. It'll be foolish on our part to see confrontation with China. We have to deal with China very pragmatically. So there's the other side of the relationship where we want to build a stronger economic relationship.
Basically what you're saying is
so I think the balance
is okay, but
the balance is fine.
Balance is fine.
Yeah.
Ambassador Mansingh, before we go into China, how will Donald Trump's victory in the US change the shape of the world? And
can
how
we discuss China for a while and then
okay,
go to
let me finish my question.
Okay.
So Trump's coming, how will it change the shape of the world? And how will it impact India in particular?
Okay, I think you have to accept the fact that Trump has been elected by the American people. And no country has the right to question the choice of the leaders of a country. If the Americans in their wisdom decided that he'll be the president, so be it. So let's work on the fact that Donald Trump is going to be there. Now, is there anything that he said during the campaign that should worry us? I would say yes. He talked about how countries like China and India were stealing jobs from the Americans. how he would restrict the visas for foreigners, that will affect us, yes. But I think if you leave aside the election rhetoric, which we have seen in other candidates in past elections, there is nothing that tells me that Donald Trump is going to be hostile to India. If at all, I think there will be continuity in America's policy of having a strategic partnership with India. And I even think that there might be areas in which our relations might improve. Example, Donald Trump has spoken so strongly against terrorism, particularly in the United States, that when he sits in the White House, I'm sure he will be briefed on the role of Pakistan in exporting terrorism into this entire region. I think if he's going to be strong on terrorism, there is no way he can ignore Pakistan's role, and therefore that will be to our benefit. Second, that Trump has been accusing China of stealing jobs, but he has also said that when he comes to power, he is going to declare China as a currency manipulator and is going to renegotiate the trade deals with China. If Trump is looking at China as an economic aggressor, I think logically he should also see China as a threat to the security, not only to the United States, but to the countries of the region. Okay. That's positive. Thirdly, in terms of business, don't forget he comes from the world of business. He's a deal maker. Indo-US trade is one of the most dynamic trades that we have. It's growing from $100 billion. We aim to achieve $500 billion in the next few years. I think Trump will be a good asset for pushing up our bilateral trade. So I think there are some positives that we can expect from a Trump administration.
Manish, having invested heavily in the Indo-US relationship, do you think we are ready, as other people are saying, to engage with the world vision of a Republican president? And would Trump be beneficial for India?
Well, Bharat, the conventional wisdom has been that notwithstanding our great love for the Democrats, a Republican dispensation has always been much better for India. That's been the conventional wisdom. But the fact is that with President Trump, and I entirely agree with Ambassador Mansingh that it's the right of any country to choose its leaders, and you deal with the political establishment which is there at the helm, you've actually entered fairly uncharted territory. Now, if I caught the headlines properly in the morning, there was a report about an increasingly gushing conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Now, if that report is correct,
that gushing conversation centers around two words: fantastic. Pakistan is a fantastic people. You're a fantastic guy, and we'll have an amazing relationship.
But again, Bharat, if those initial straws in the wind are correct, it does not square up with our expectation that he is going to lean very heavily on Pakistan. Number two, I do not think anybody was really expecting President Trump to win. I do not know how much of homework the current Indian government has actually done in reaching out to his people. Well, he didn't have a transition team, unlike President Clinton or Mrs. Clinton, who had everybody right down to the assistant secretary marked out. So therefore, they were almost prepared to come in. So you've actually entered completely uncharted territory. I think at this point in time, President Trump is also himself not very clear where he's heading. So it's a administration on the hop, and you'll have to deal with them as you go along.
Raj, I know that you don't hold this view. You believe that the Indo-US relationship is far too institutionalized for it to be affected by whether a Republican president comes or a Democratic president comes. But are we ready to engage with the vision of Trump? Is this government ready?
I think if you see the last 20 years, and I think since President Clinton, a Democrat who came here in March 2000, the relationship has been steadily on the up. We've removed the Pakistan and the Kashmir question off the main line. We've resolved the nuclear dispute. We do a lot more strategic and political cooperation today. So I think there is a bipartisan consensus on both sides. Both the Congress and BJP here and the Republicans and the Democrats have constructed a relationship. I think that will endure. But I think my cautionary remarks at this point is, look, let's not tie our relationship too closely to what Mr. Trump does with Pakistan and China. After all, the US-China relationship has grown in the last 30 years, started by Mao Zedong and Nixon. In spite of that, our relationship has also grown. Similarly with Pakistan, I mean, the last 20 years, the US has, certainly after 9/11, close to $30 billion of American aid to Pakistan has gone. That still hasn't changed our relationship. So I think we should not see it in such a narrow prism, and that we must build on our strengths, not to keep complaining about, there's one phone call, I don't know if they'll change the world, but the fact is, look, these things happen. Pakistan and China are too big to be ignored by anyone. So that will be a factor we have to take into account. But the larger issue, I think, is this. There is going to be a retreat of American power from the Eurasian landmass on the issues relating to globalization, on the issues relating to American alliances in Europe and Asia. Trump has raised questions which are fundamentally different from the mainstream positions of a globalist, forward military presence attitudes of the United States. What does this do to us? That is the bigger question. I think there I would say it's an opportunity for us, that if the US scales down its forward military presence, we have to take a more active, more engaged role in this part of the world, build our own alliances, build new partnerships with Japan, with Vietnam on the east. We need to do more with the Europeans. So I think all these years we were afraid of American power. If American power is going to decline, then we should be prepared to play our own game. I think that is going to be our test, not what he does with one country or the other country.
Ambassador Sibal, do you want to say something on Trump and what we need to do?
But before that, just a little correction. I mentioned Depsang, it was Chumar, it was not Depsang. Depsang, in fact, although Mr. Manish Tewari is there, I think the foreign minister at that time said that this was acne on the face, on a beautiful face, and with a little ointment it will go away. So that was quite different from the position that.
But on Trump, do you want to say something?
On Trump, I think it's an unknown. We are entering, as was rightly said, somewhat uncharted territory because he's made so many statements which are contradictory, and one doesn't know which side of his view on things the dice will fall. Some of his appointments could be a matter of some concern because of their personalities and their views and how they may affect policy. He has, of course, nominated a person of Indian origin as the ambassador to the United Nations, which might actually improve the working atmosphere in the UN Security Council. I think broadly what has been said in terms of some of the views he's expressed on H-1B visas, on jobs being stolen, especially manufacturing jobs, although China is the bigger culprit because we ourselves don't have a manufacturing sector, but on the services we might come under pressure, certainly. Now, with regard to the Western Pacific, it's interesting. On the one hand, he's been saying that he's going to make a very strong, he's going to reinforce America's military strength. At the same time, he has made some statements which suggest some degree of isolationism and throw the burden of security on Japan and South Korea and others, therefore withdraw from the region. Now, one doesn't know, because this is contradictory, one doesn't know again what will happen, but if he begins to withdraw, then I think all the joint strategic vision we have signed, etc., would begin to hollow out because the United States actually is the linchpin of all this. On terrorism, yes, I think the signs are that we'll have better cooperation and more understanding and receptivity. On the other hand, the United States is still bogged down in Afghanistan, and Pakistan's utility certainly remains, and therefore the United States will not cut its relationship. And furthermore, General Flynn was the head of the Central Command, which has traditionally worked very closely with Pakistan, and he's the National Security Advisor. So to what extent that may influence within their own discussions, attitudes towards and policies towards Pakistan is a bit of an open question. I think it's a mixed bag. It's too early to judge.
Okay.
On the
But we
whole,
are
I
ready
would
to
say,
deal with them?
on the whole, I would say that we would be able to live quite well with the Trump presidency.
Okay, all right. Ambassador Lalit Mansingh, in all this sort of closeness that we are developing with the US, which of course, all of you say is beneficial, do you think Prime Minister Modi has taken into consideration the potential economic and geopolitical costs of alienating Russia, an all-weather friend of India in strategic matters up to now? And what is the state of India-Russia relationship? And has this government done anything new? Has it broken new ground with Russia?
I disagree. I don't think there is anything to suggest that we have alienated Russia. I think our strategic partnership with Russia is strong. And I would say Mr. Modi has made extra efforts to reinforce that partnership. But the fact remains that we are thinking in terms of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union does not exist. And Russia is not the Soviet Union, not as strong, not as economically prosperous.
Yep.
Therefore, we are dealing with a weaker Russia, which is incapable of giving us the kind of services that we were used to in the past. At the same time, Russia remains a very important partner, because I think if you look at our military cooperation, this will continue for a long time to come, because so much of our military equipment is from Russian sources. And we are dealing with state-of-the-art technology like the 5th generation aircraft which we are developing with Russia. Okay. But there is also another sector where we are going to be very dependent on the Russians on energy. Not only are the Russians already producing nuclear power through their power stations here, they have plans to expand that. So Kudankulam, in fact, is going to be a huge powerhouse for India. Besides that, we have invested in the Sakhalin oil fields. We have expanded our investments in Russia. So Russia will remain a very important partner for us for military and for energy requirements.
Okay. Manish, before I come to you, you are India's ambassador in Russia. What do you make of Russia's defense-related overtures to Pakistan, which Manish had pointed to, and the military exercises with Pakistan, which seem from the Indian perspective completely mistimed immediately after the Uri terrorist attack? So could these overtures be related to India's sort of pivot towards the US?
Well, all this while I was of the view that really there is no geopolitical conflict of interest between India and Russia, and that accounted for the stability of our relationship. If you look at our relationship with any other country in the world, it has never been as stable as it has been with Russia. And Russia was the second most important country, so it was quite an achievement. But then what has really happened is that while our relationship with the United States has improved, Russia's relationship with the United States has deteriorated very sharply. These were two independent processes, but Russia has been forced into the arms of China. And now they are looking at all options where they can counter American influence and American power in every part of the world. Wherever there are fissures developing between the United States and a country, they are coming in. And this explains why they are reaching out to Pakistan. First is the China factor, because the China-Pakistan relationship is very strong, so Russia is willing to strategically align itself a little bit to Chinese interests in Pakistan. And secondly, there are tensions developing between Pakistan and United States, so Russia wants to fish in troubled waters. I think Russia is making a serious mistake. I don't know who's advising Putin.
But India-US does not figure in this calculation.
No, not really. Okay. The Russians themselves tried very hard to become close to the United States. The United States has constantly rebuffed them for various reasons, expansion of NATO, etc., etc. Right. So they'll be very childish. They're mature people. Okay. It just is the dynamics of the situation has changed because of the US-Russia relationship deteriorated very badly.
All right. So Manish, let's move to China. How successful do you think this government has been in handling the relationship with China? Was there an assumption and an expectation that quick deals would be signed with China because of the personal chemistry between our Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping? Both of them, sat on a swing in Sabarmati. Then Prime Minister Modi went and visited the hometown of President Xi Jinping, and we thought FDI will start flowing. Has any of this happened?
Well, Bharat, if you step back and look at as to why we are where we are in our relationship with China, which is not in the most sweetest of places, it's primarily because Prime Minister Modi has tripped on the very skillful balancing act which is required to finish the global power dynamic. So therefore, between the US, China, Russia, which of course, notwithstanding the problems that it has with its oil economy at the moment, is now punching more above its weight or to its weight, even in the Middle East as we speak. So there has obviously been a blowback of all that, of this perceived closeness to the United States of America in both our relationship with China and our relationship with Russia. While I agree with Ambassador Sibal entirely that the Russians are possibly trying to fish in troubled and untroubled waters, it should worry us, because having been the most stable and the most strategic relationship that we've had, if Russia talks about selling arms to Pakistan, if Russia talks about trying to get into the ambit of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which actually is not a very bad idea at some point in time, if relations between India, Pakistan and India, China improve. CPAC, even for India, is not a very bad idea, but in the short term, there is a problem there. And with China, I think we've entered a phase of regression, because notwithstanding the Prime Minister's visit to Xi'an, notwithstanding President Xi Jinping going to the Sabarmati, you have this boycott of Chinese goods as we speak, an informal boycott. So all this, I think, does not augur really well. But the larger picture is that we are not a littoral state of the Western Pacific. India or China is India's biggest neighbor. We need to factor that in and then really decide as to what our strategy, even in the Western Pacific or the South China Sea, should be. So I think we are going somewhere wrong on China.
So we are really running out of time. I know that you would have wanted to say something on China, but let me ask you about Pakistan. Why has this government taken this country through a roller coaster ride in its relationship with Pakistan? One day you want to talk to them, next day you said no talks, third day you go to Lahore for Nawaz Sharif's birthday, fourth day there is Pathankot attack, fifth you have ISI team coming and visiting Pathankot. Then you have Uri attack, then you have surgical strikes, and you say we'll never talk to you. Terrorism and talks don't go together. What is going on? Why
and you have
can't we
Sartaj
have
Aziz in town.
Sorry?
And then you're going to have Sartaj Aziz in town.
But for Heart of Asia,
but
that's different. But the question is, why has he not been able to forge a stable template for relating with China, with Pakistan? I beg your pardon.
Look, I think flip-flops are very much part of our strategy towards Pakistan. I mean, can you tell me a government that has not flip-flopped on Pakistan?
But this much?
No. 10 years of Manmohan Singh government, he did equal number of flip-flops. There were equal number of terrorist incidents. You would give a decent interval after a terrorist attack, you start talking. So I think, look, there is a problem. This is not between any two countries. This is like a civil war, and the partition and its consequences are still with us. So I think there is certain cousins business out here which is going to be with us. The question is, I think the important thing about Modi's policy towards Pakistan, has he changed the structure of the relationship? It doesn't matter how many flip-flops he's made, but I think he's done some things which I think we should all note. One, by doing what you're doing on the LOC, by crossing the LOC, you're trying to raise the quality of deterrence. I don't know if that will work, but I think we've ramped up the amount of use of force. Second, I think he's talking about horizontal escalation. In the past, we merely accepted POK is part of Pakistan, but today, you're raising questions about it. You are engaged in Balochistan, though the previous government started it. Today there's an escalation in Balochistan. Today you're reaching out to the friends of Pakistan to put some pressure on Pakistan. So I think there is, I think for the first time in 30 years, there is a change of course towards Pakistan to alter the mix between use of coercion and use of engagement. My sense is this changing this mix is going to be very, very consequential.
So before I throw the session open to questions, I have one last issue to discuss with you, which is addressed to you, Ambassador Sibal. What do you think of Prime Minister Modi's neighbourhood first policy? Where does it stand 2.5 years down his tenure?
But as I said, I need to clarify that Russia has formally made a statement that they are not supporting CPEC. I think is useful for the audience.
China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Yes. Now, insofar as the neighbourhood first policy is concerned, I think Prime Minister Modi, like his predecessors, began with the idea that we must make an extra effort to win over our neighbours. And there's general acceptance of the fact that India has not been very good at dealing with its neighbours. It has not been generous enough. They are small countries. We could win them over, tie them to our economy and build greater influence. And because of the lack of it, we have allowed external powers to come in and neutralize our influence there to some extent.
Are you referring to China, which has increased its footprint in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Seychelles, Mauritius?
The point is that, again, as was said by Rajamohan earlier, that the world is full of sovereign states, and our neighbors are also sovereign states. And it's very, very difficult to openly intervene in the internal affairs of countries. And when countries intervene in the internal affairs of others, it leaves a very lasting legacy of mistrust and suspicion, which then poisons your relationship for decades ahead. Therefore, there are limits to which we could intervene in these countries, and they have wanted to play an external card to balance their interests against a large country like India, and also identity politics. They want to separate themselves from India. They want to have their distinctive personality and identity. So they brought in United States and China. United States is not playing the same game, except a little bit with Pakistan, because our relations with US have improved. But China has stepped up its intervention in our neighborhood at our expense, and we have lost a great deal of influence, whether it's in Nepal or Sri Lanka. Happily, most recently, with the change of government in Nepal and in Sri Lanka, we are somewhat better off. And with Bangladesh, our relationship have improved. But the fact is that these countries have a good relations with us. We'll always reach out to China. China is sitting on $3 trillion of foreign exchange. They have such capacities in terms of infrastructure. They have these huge connectivity projects. All of them would like to benefit from it, and we don't have the same resources. So there will always be a challenge that we'll face from China in our neighborhood.
All right. Okay. So I have a lot of other questions for them, but and a lot of regions of the world which we have not covered. So I hope you'll ask them questions on these issues. Short questions. Identify yourself, and please say to whom the question is addressed. Okay, gentleman at the back. Question from the back, please.
Good evening. I'm an MPhil student at School of International Studies. My question to the distinguished panelists is regarding India's relationship with Europe, given the Brexit scenario that's played out, as well as some have observed that Russia is now an ascendant power in Europe. A lot of governments are having rethink over their relationship with Kremlin. So how should India now deal with Europe that's undergoing a lot of internal change? Thank you.
Who would like to take it up?
Well, I think Europe per se is not really the interlocutor to which we have traditionally given importance. It is individual countries in Europe, whether it's France, Germany, or UK, who have been our principal partners. It's only on economic issues that we deal with Brussels. And we've had a difficult relationship with Brussels. We've not been able to move forward with our free trade agreement. So we must distinguish between European countries and EU as an institution. I think our relationship with individual European countries is very good, whether with France, Germany, or the UK. In fact, EU as a whole is the biggest investor in India and the biggest trading partner of India. So it's a very vital relationship. When it comes to defense or atomic energy or space, we don't deal with Brussels, we deal with individual European countries. Insofar as Russia being ascendant in Europe, I don't think so, because so long as NATO is there and US actually is in control of European defense and security policies, there will be a limit to which Europe can independently deal with Russia. What you are talking about is the sanctions business, because United States has virtually no trade relationship with Russia, and therefore they can easily impose sanctions, which they can't do on China, because what they actually criticize Russia for, condemn Russia for, are precisely the things that China is doing. But that trade relationship and investment relationship is so large that they dare not impose sanctions. But Europe has a very vital relationship with Russia. So what we are seeing is possible tensions developing, because the European public is increasingly against sanctions on Russia, though the European establishments are still in favor, the political parties and the media and everything else. So it's a dynamic situation.
Okay, at the back again.
Madhukar Shyam from Center for East Asia Study, School of International Studies. My question is from C. Rajamohan sir. Sir, why India is avoiding non-alignment movement, which was introduced by Nehru government and portrayed India connected to the world. And another question is, another comment is to Manish Tewari sir, is that CPEC, in which Russia has articulated that Russia is not joining or had any secret talk with Pakistan in relation with CPEC. Thank you.
Raj?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think we are ignoring the non-aligned movement. I think the non-aligned movement is dead. Every 3 years, we wheel out the body, do a little bit of puja and shove it back in. So you want to take that seriously? I mean, look, I think India's relationship with most of the leading developing countries today are much broader, much bigger today than at the peak of the non-aligned movement. there is a difference between India's non-alignment policy as opposed to the movement. The movement today has largely been replaced in India's view. Today we are a member of the G20, where the world's global economic issues are discussed. We are a member of the BRICS, where actually we're dealing with other powers. We're a member of IPSAC, we're a member of the ASEAN-centered institutions. So I think in terms of engagement with the non-Western world today, there's a lot more happening today. So don't get too obsessed with non-alignment. It's a footnote in history. It'll just disappear sooner than later.
Okay, there.
I'm Niranjan Oak, student of MPhil from School of International Studies. In the past, we have seen that whenever new president or prime minister comes, he tries to befriend the adversary. I mean, when Modi came, he tried to improve relations with Pakistan. When Ghani came, he tried to improve relations with Pakistan. Again, Obama in 2008, he tried to form a condominium, that is G2. So we can expect Trump to offer a hand of friendship to China. So in this case, will it be at the cost of middle powers like India, Japan, Australia, and what impact will it have on the overall world order? Thank you.
Ambassador Lalit Mansingh, do you want to take that?
Well, any G2 is not acceptable to India. It's against our interest that two countries take upon themselves the responsibility of supervising the rest of the world. And the few attempts that have been made have all failed, mercifully. So, if Mr. Trump tries it, he'll probably come to the same conclusions as President Obama, that it's not worthwhile and it's not going to work. So, I think we're quite safe that way.
Okay, the lady here.
I'm Upma Kashyap, a PhD student, US Studies program. My question is to Ambassador Mansingh. How India and Japan are coming closer at a systematic, bilaterally, and what repercussions will it have on India and China relations?
Well, the fact is that when we speak of the Indo-Pacific, that is actually a concept that Prime Minister Abe has come up with, the confluence of the seas. So our partnership with Japan is now covering the entire region. And I would say the credit of this government is that it has established such close relations with Japan. And that is right, because the US may give us an overall security in the region, but actually it's the countries of this region which have to cooperate with each other for security. That way I think Japan is our most valuable ally in this area. And not to forget that Japan is also a great economic power and also becoming a source of security for us in military terms. So we need to cultivate Japan and keep Japan close to us.
Just, China doesn't ask itself the question, when it does something with Pakistan, what does India might think? So I don't think you should get too worried about what China might think. That we must engage everyone to our benefit. We must engage everyone to our benefit. There will be consequences. That's part of the world. So you got to deal with the consequences and not get too paralyzed by the fear of what the third party might do.
Okay, before I take another question, any question on Act East?
Sir, it's almost 3 years when Xi Jinping came, 4 years, but in the G20 or there was TTP and Trans-Pacific Partnership, and China came up with the Maritime Silk Road and Continental Silk Road. Now we have OBOR, and then India started the Act East after Modi came and he went to USA. Do you think that we are progressing well on the connectivity aspect? Because apart from introduction of some railway links, and we don't have much on that front, how do you view the entire possibility of Act East? How much we are connecting Northeast to the Southeast Asia if our rail communication links are not proper?
Well, I think you must remember that Act East is not a new policy. It's an extension of the Look East policy that started under Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. Now, you're quite right. The weakness of our Look East or Act East policy is that our implementation is not good enough. And that is when you mention connectivity. The kind of programs we have with Bangladesh, with Myanmar, with Nepal, with our neighboring countries, We have announced big projects, but we have not been able to carry them out. But Act East is not only confined to the immediate neighborhood in the east. In fact, Mr. Modi has said that when he looks east, he looks at the western shores of the United States. So this large Indo-Pacific region that you have to look at. And here I think the government has made significant progress in terms of security in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, here, second row.
It is about that we see the international studies in India, it's very limited to few universities like JNU, Jadavpur University, and we have seen when in a great power making, education plays a very important role, especially in that field. And we do lack a culture of think tank, especially to international relations. How do you see that? Is there a correlation? Do you see that?
I think there is a general problem of what has been called the capability or institutional gap in India in the conduct of foreign policy. So it's not, I don't think it is the number of think tanks or the number of universities, but I think the need to strengthen our capacity to study and understand other societies. Because our interests have become global. As I said, look, India has become the third largest economy. So our interests today from Latin America to Southern Pacific, in every corner of the world today, there are a lot more. But are we doing enough to study and understand them? And I think you raised an important question. Now, the fact is today that we are way behind in terms of creating expertise. India historically, say for example, had people speaking the languages all across Asia. But today, there are not enough people who know Arabic and study the Middle East. Those who know Urdu and study Pakistan, we're really short of people. But but it's not going to be done merely by the state. So I think it has to be done in a much larger national effort to strengthen our capacity to understand other societies, other civilizations, and other people.
Okay, Professor Bhattacharya.
What is Indians look like through this foreign policy of international relation?
Manish?
Well, as I look at it, what you've really witnessed over the last 30 months is, for the lack of a better word, the spectacleization of diplomacy, turning diplomacy into a spectacle. And I do not know how much is it really going to even help the Indian diaspora, because by congregating people in large numbers in countries where they are trying their best to assimilate, are you not setting them up as targets, rather than any kind of pressure groups? I don't think anybody's really looked at it from that perspective, that have you really done more harm to the diaspora than any good by collecting them in stadia and really chest thumping? You see, conceptually, I do not think this spectacleization is even thought through. It's possibly a kind of a personal vengeance against countries who denied the Prime Minister visa. So therefore, it's an attempt to tell them and their leadership that, look, I have arrived and I have the ability to do these spectacles even in your own country. So if you look at the last 30 months in any perspective, I don't think that these jamborees and tamashas, for the lack of a better word, have really done Indian diplomacy any good.
But I don't know how many of our panelists will agree with you.
Well, that's my view. I mean, everybody is entitled to disagree.
It's a point of view, but we've run out of time. Raj, we've run out of time. So we'll have to close it here. I would like to thank all my guests, Dr. C. Rajamohan, Mr. Manish Tewari, Ambassador Lalit Mansingh, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, for participating in this discussion. I would also like to thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. I'd like to thank Jawaharlal Nehru University for providing us this opportunity of holding this discussion here. Thank you for joining India's World.